Hi, Professor. This is Jacob again. Remember me? Okay. Now, this is not going to be a continuation of your afterlife thesis that was like a couple months ago. This is a response to your latest video about how you had interaction, how you think shock of God is crazy, which I agree with you, and how you think there's a lack of dialogue about your ideas. Here, I'll show you what I'm talking about.
I don't know how to help bring about genuine kinds of dialogue. Maybe there just is too much at the present time, too much ego involvement, too much attachment and fear, and I don't know. It would seem unfortunate that people are unable to playfully, see themselves as both atheist and theist. At least.
Okay. Um, I see what you're trying to do here, and I commend you for that. But let me give you I'm going to give you some advice. You can either accept it or you can reject it. Okay? Before you can have any sort of discussion or dialogue with anybody, especially on YouTube, I would recommend you first establish a common ground. Okay? You can have all the facts, you can have all the information, you can have all the critical thinking skills necessary to have a discussion with anybody. But it's not going to get you anywhere if you do not have a discussion if you do not establish a common ground with someone, especially someone who disagrees with your worldview. Everyone has a worldview. Everyone has a different perspective on how they see the world and how they do all this. Everyone does. Anyone who denies this needs to really reevaluate that claim, that belief. Okay? Everyone has a worldview. You have a different worldview than I do. If let's say you wanted to have a discussion with another person who is a religious moderate about your ideas, before you could do that, you need to try and understand where they are coming from. Not understanding where they are coming from is going to make it very harder for both parties and both parties. If neither party is willing to cooperate, there's no point in discussing. There's no point and people are wasting their time. I recommend before you even get into discussion about your ideas, you should try to understand the other person's ideas first before you can even engage in it. Try to establish some sort of common ground, some sort of leeway where both people, you and the other person discussing, is having an agreement. We'll have an agreement on this. Once you do that, then you can start building it like a Jenga tower. Building it to the point where you can have a reasonable, rational discussion. Like I'll like this is why if you do not establish common ground with another person with your ideas, this is why no one should be surprised if they misinterpret your ideas or they get frustrated with your ideas. Like the whole idea of not establishing common ground is very vital. Like I'll give the theist atheist debate for as an example. You were talking about how like you were agreeing with the idea that some theists are generally atheists in regards to other religions or other conceptions of God. The problem is not every theist is going to agree with that conception, so it makes it kind of hard to even have a discussion about that if the other person does not agree with your definition. This is why I love being an English major. It gives me a start of how to understand different points of view before you even begin having a discussion. recently I'm taking an African literature class right now, and we're discussing this book. Really good book. I highly recommend you read this book. Um, about African. It's about a group of African workers on strike in 1947, 1948. About railroad strike in Western Africa. Really gives me an understanding of how these people work, how these people behave, and how these people think, how these people see the world, and how these people interact. There's one line in particular I think this would be relevant for this. It's on page 94 and says this. A long time ago, Fakita said, before any of you were born, everything that happened within a framework, an order that was our own, and the existence of that order was of great importance in our lives. Today, no such framework exists. There are no castes among people, no difference in the quality of grain or of the bread that is made from the grain. There are no weavers, no artisans in metal, no makers of fine shoes. I think it is the machine which has ground everything together this way and brought everything to a single level. Abraham Bakayoko said to me not long ago, when we have succeeded in stirring up the people of this country and making them one, we will go on and do the same thing between ourselves and the people on the other side of the ocean. Now, you may be asking, what does this have to do with this discussion? That line in particular, those passages in particular in this book, really gives me an understanding of their mindset of these African people, of how these people operate, of how these people think, how these people feel, and all this stuff. By understanding their point of view, I could be able to try to see where they're coming from. Then, if I wanted to, I could have a discussion with them. But that way, I can find that would be a perfect way to establish a common ground between them, between them and me. This is the same criteria can be applied to the atheist theist debate. If neither party is willing to agree to certain terms or certain common ground, then there's no point in having a discussion. You talk a lot about how you're against dogma. What about certain people who have different conceptions of what the word dogma means? Do we establish a meaning first before we can talk about whether good dogma is good or bad? Because not everyone's going to agree on certain terms. And if neither party is willing to agree on certain terms, people are just going to end up pulling their hair out and end up getting frustrated, and no dialogue goes anywhere. All right. There are a couple people on YouTube I would definitely recommend you having a discussion with. First one I can think of off the top of my head is Rational Roundtable, Michael Crawford. He is brilliant. I'll put a link to his channel in the description box. He is the most rational thinking, most laid back person on this website, in my opinion. At least in my opinion. I think if you can find people, I don't think you can find anyone, theists or non-theists alike, you could not want to have a discussion with other than Rational Roundtable. I highly recommend his channel if you want to have some sort of dialogue. If you want to really have dialogue. But before you can even have dialogue, I recommend you establish common ground with someone you're talking to. Okay? Anyway, I think that's about it. But now before I end this, just a quick recap. If you want to have a discussion, if you want to have dialogue on this medium, fine. Understand that people are going to have different worldviews than you. They're going to have different ways of seeing things. They're going to have different ideas. They're going to have different understandings of the ambiguities in the world. Understand that. Establish a common ground first before you can have a discussion. Because if you're here, but the other person's here, you're never going to get anywhere. Plain and simple. Okay? That's all I have to say. Thank you for watching.